Hello, my name is Karina Smiley, and I am an undergraduate senior at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. This past semester, I have had the opportunity and absolute pleasure of studying abroad in Auckland, New Zealand for 5 months. It has been without a doubt the most fulfilling and enjoyable semester of my academic career. Auckland is located in the upper region of New Zealand's North Island and has a population of 1.5 million, making it New Zealand's largest city. It is often called the City of Sails based on the fact that it is surrounded by water on three sides and it is quite a popular port city. The program I studied abroad through was called IFSA Butler, affiliated with Butler University in Indiana. IFSA Butler was very instrumental in my time studying abroad. When I first arrived in New Zealand, my program picked us up from the airport and took us to an orientation camp in which we learned how to play rugby, kayak, and also visited a marae, which is the spiritual grounds and meeting place of the native Maori people of New Zealand. We were greeted with a traditional Maori welcome ceremony and by the chief and invited to stay in the marae for the night, which was a great honor for all of us, having this being our first time visiting New Zealand and a Maori marae. While on the spiritual grounds of the marae, we were shown a Maori haka, which is a traditional war cry used by Maori warriors to intimidate their opponents. Hakas are a beautiful and expressive tradition to watch, and were by far one of my favorite aspects to learn about while I was studying abroad in New Zealand. When we entered the big house, or meeting ground, the chief of the tribe greeted each and every one of us with a hongi, which is where two individuals touch their foreheads and noses to each other. It is like a familiar handshake greeting to the Maori to signify that each person has peaceful intentions. The emphasis on the past and present cultural identity of New Zealand was apparent throughout the entire country. Many museums in Auckland and other cities acknowledged the wrongs that had been done against the Maori people, but acknowledged how the Maori were gaining back their culture and representation throughout the entirety of New Zealand. New Zealand also has strong cultural ties to many Pacific and East Asian countries, including China. For the Chinese New Year, Auckland created a breathtaking Chinese lantern display that included hundreds of lit figurines to celebrate the commencement of the Chinese New Year, this year being the Year of the Dog. In addition to the cultural exposure, I was able to do a large amount of traveling and exploration in my time studying abroad. One of my favorite cities was Wellington, New Zealand's capital city. They had a streetcar pictured here that looked similar to the St. Charles streetcar, reminding me what it means to miss New Orleans. Another highlight of my travels was traveling up to Cape Reinga towards the end of my time in New Zealand. Cape Reinga is the very tip of the North Island of New Zealand. The Maori people believe that when their ancestors die, their souls pass through this point on their way to another life. You can also see the exact place where the South Pacific Ocean meets the Tasman Sea. Additionally, on this trip, I was able to go sand surfing in the sand dunes surrounding Cape Reinga. As it turns out, sand surfing is much more difficult and much more exhilarating than I anticipated, but I would highly recommend it to anyone who wants to try. At the beginning of the semester, my friends and I discovered a passion for finding and swimming in waterfalls while we were in New Zealand, which turns out aren't hard to come by. Seems like every few miles there's a new waterfall to dip your feet in. We were able to drive just minutes out of Auckland City and find copious amounts of natural wonders to explore. Just a few hours outside of Auckland, there is an infamous hot water beach that formed on the top of natural hot springs. If you go at low tide, bring your friends and a shovel, you can dig down into the ground deep enough to fill your hole with hot water and make your own natural hot tub. My favorite part of my time studying abroad was our 2-week mid-semester break in which me and a few friends flew down to New Zealand's South Island, rented a car, and visited 15 cities in just 16 days. A lot of car games, podcasts, and some killer playlists helped us conquer the sometimes 7-hour drives through the most beautiful parts of New Zealand's landscape. While in Queenstown, the adventure capital of the Southern Hemisphere, I was convinced to go skydiving, which sparked great anxiety in myself, but even more my poor parents. However, I am so thankful I took the leap, no pun intended, because it was one of the most breathtaking views I have ever seen and the most accomplished I have ever felt after I landed on 2 feet. Additionally, while on this 2-week extravaganza, We were able to see the variety of topography New Zealand is so famous for. We visited Mount Cook, the highest point in New Zealand, and were able to see the Abel Tasman Glacier as well. Although we were severely underdressed for the altitude and the weather, the views were astounding. Traveling up in latitude to New Zealand's premier wine region of Marlborough, I was able to put all the knowledge I had learned in my wine science class to the test. Upon visiting 6 different vineyards and sampling all the tastings they had to offer, I have to say, New Zealand's infamous Sauvignon Blanc wine does really live up to its name. The most serene and reflective moment I had on this expedition was kayaking for 6 hours in Milford Sound. This massive sound connects to the Tasman Sea and is hands down the most dumbfounding place I've ever been. For 6 hours, we kayaked through the fog and massive mountains, simply taking in the beauty and tranquility surrounding us. I was able to travel outside of New Zealand to Sydney, Australia to visit 2 of my best friends from Tulane who were studying at the University of Sydney. It was fantastic to see what a bustling and enormous city Sydney was. I was glad that I was able to see Australia in my time down under. My time in New Zealand was the most liberating, enjoyable, and unforgettable experience of my life. Although I have pictures and lifelong friendships to remember it by, I am already yearning to go back. New Zealand will always have a piece of my heart.